Betty Friedan was more digestible. She was a woman, a middle-aged woman. She appeared to be a housewife. She appeared to be someone that America could resonate with. And again, she felt that because the lesbian lifestyle orientation, and just everything about lesbians sat outside of that and would cause the movement to be made fun of, a mockery of. So she chose to always detract lesbians from the movement or speak out against lesbians being included in the women's liberation movement. So then we get to the gay liberation movement. The gay liberation movement is a social and political movement of the late 1960s through the mid 80s that urged lesbians and gay men to engage in radical direct action and counter societal shame with gay pride. The gay pride liberation was really pivotal and was started by an action at Stonewall. There was a bar called the Stonewall Bar, and during that time, the police used to raid this bar to harass people of the LGBT community. During one raid, there were people that resisted, and it broke out into a riot that happened over several days. But two of the leaders of this movement have been almost erased from this movement. And again, unless you go searching for this history, sometimes this is not commonplace history. We have Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. Again, these women were erased from the movement in so many ways because they weren't digestible figures again. When it was thought, a lot of gay men that were straight presenting, a lot of women that were lesbian were again straight presenting or hetero presenting, felt that in including trans personalities and personalities that did not fit the societal norm, that their movement would not have any traction, their movement would not go forward. So again, these figures were erased due to them not being digestible again. These women have done several work as far as developing housing for homeless and at-risk youth during the time, going out and marching for legislation, also involving themselves with protests throughout the gay liberation movement. And both of these women, again, were erased. Marsha P. Johnson, as we know, was murdered. Her murder is still unsolved. And Sylvia Rivera pretty much died living to try to get liberation rights for gay and transgendered individuals, but the movement kind of extracted her from that. They really pushed her out. I mean, there's footage of her even at a rally where people are basically telling her to get off the stage. They're throwing things at her. They're saying really vile and inappropriate comments to her as far as her participation in the liberation movement. So again, we find figures that have started these movements, but again, when we think about liberation movements or we think about movements that are trying to highlight the marginalization of certain people in America, those marginalized people sometimes tend to pick figures that can be more digestible and more present to the heteronormative patriarchal society that we kind of live in. And that's at a debt for us because, again, I always fall on the term, if one of us is not free, all of us cannot be free. So therefore, when we are extracting these people from their movements, we know that we necessarily can't get the real freedom, equality, or equity that we seek in these movements. As aforementioned, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. Black Lives Matter Foundation, Inc. is a global organization in the US, UK, and Canada whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. By combating and countering acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. Again, Black Lives Matter was not only created by women, but one of the founders of Black Lives Matter is also an LGBTQ identified individual. It is not necessarily them who have extracted LGBTQ identities from the Black Lives Matter movement, but again, like any other movement, you have smaller fringe movements within these fringe movements, and there's necessarily fringe movements that have sprouted outside of the Black Lives Matter movement that has said it is not necessary to represent or bring forth knowledge or understanding around these LGBTQ Black identities. They have said we're going to extract them from the process. We're going to marginalize them even further because we want to be more acceptable and digestible to the overall power structure. And we feel that if we include LGBTQ identities into this conversation, we are again going to not get all our needs met. And you see this time and time again in history where things and people and persons that are not digestible to the norm are extracted in order to assimilate closer to what people find as normal, quote unquote, normal in our society. So from that, we then, for the term of that, is really respectability politics, which is a set of beliefs holding that conformity to prescribed mainstream standards of appearance and behavior will protect a person who is part of a marginalized group, especially a Black person, from prejudices and systematic injustices. I chose the photos that I have in the layout specifically for that. If you think about how people look at and assess Blackness, the most digestible Blackness to America in most recent times was the Obamas. When they looked at that family, it was a nuclear family. They had the 2.5 children. Michelle and Barack were both college graduates. You know, they had pretty much attained the American dream. That image is most digestible. But then if you go to the top left corner, one of the iconic black films that I came up growing up with was Claudine. Claudine was a film about a mother who lived on social assistance. It was kind of about a trope of the Black welfare queen, basically. But in that movie, you also saw and resonated with Claudine because a lot of people that you grew up with in your neighborhood were living the life that Claudine had. And that didn't make her any lesser because she had children. That didn't make her any lesser because she had to be on social assistance. And, you know, that didn't make her any lesser desirable or wanting to be in a relationship with a man just because these were her circumstances. But again, in America, it is always painted as the downfall of America, the breaking of the family, when it's referenced to single mothers, specifically single Black mothers. You know, this is always looked at as something that is the negative. So again, when we think about these movements that I aforementioned, we look at how, again, these movements have moved more to respectability in order to be absorbed into the mainstream. And that happens very much in marginalized groups. You know, when marginalized persons and tend to access power, they tend to say, what part of us does not resonate with this power structure? What part of us does not, do we have bias against? Do we still mistreat and malign? So therefore, we have to absorb those same activities that the power structure will say. So again, the LGBTQ movement, for example, a lot of gay men feel that we should detract from trans issues, you know? So not necessarily is it just when you think about Black individuals, it's just cisgender Black individuals. You'll also find that there are some gay identified individuals that appear in a heteronormative space that say, well, we should detract from that because that's too hard for people to digest. And if people just see us as hetero-presenting people within the community, that will be easier for our movement to move forward. Cultural competence. This has been a buzzword throughout the last 10 years that a lot of people will throw around when talking about race and kind of trying to work in communities and uplift communities that they think are in need of help or communities that lack access to certain services. What I always like to tell people about cultural competency, that it is a living and growing thing. You should never exist in a workspace, specifically if you're in social work, public health, medicine, even education. You should never exist in a space where you feel like I've engaged with these people enough that I've mastered them. Because cultural competence says it is the ability to understand, communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. Cultural competence encompasses being aware of one's own worldview, developing positive attitudes towards cultural differences, gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews. So if you really think about that, this is a living thing. There is no way you can enter a community, a space, engage women, engage men, engage trans folks, and believe you know everything about that community. Because as all of us know, we all show up in different ways. Essentially, when you think about the Black community, you cannot think about the Black community as a monolith. We have all come from different parts of the world. We have all been conditioned under different religions and constructs. We've all came through different traumas. We're all from different spaces of affluence or poverty. So when you think about Black folks and you think, oh, well, all Black folks are marginalized, so they should understand the marginalization of LGBTQ identities and then the further marginalization of Black, queer, and LGBTQ identities, that's not necessarily so. Because if this person or this individual or this group is not seeking to be culturally competent of all pieces and aspects of the community that they're within, they could then again detract and only provide space for the most digestible parts of their community. So again, when we think about cultural competence, we need to think about this as a living and breathing thing, something that is constantly, you refer back to constantly to come with your best understanding of the community at that time, in that space, with that person, actually. Another example that I use, I had a conversation with some medical students, and this woman said, she was a practicing doctor. She said, well, I've serviced Black women for 20 years, and, these are the issues with Black women, and these are why these issues occur in Black women. And she went on and on and on about how she was an expert in Black women. And I told her, well, what if this Black woman doesn't identify as African American? What if this Black woman does not practice Christianity, but she practices voodoo, for example? What if this Black woman has no understanding of Western medicine, and her only understanding of medicine is from a holistic place of herbs and natural remedies? That's a whole different conversation than a woman that is coming from a certain place of affluence, that's had access to insurance and never had to have a conversation about what things cost or how to attain medical care in the midst of social service, right? And not to say that this woman with the holistic background needs to attain those social services, but that can be another nuanced conversation in how both of these Black women show up to this medical provider. So again, that's why when we look at cultural competency, we need to be very careful about saying we are culturally competent in a space. No, you have some experience dealing with that culture, that community, or that orientation of people, but you do not have a singular and authoritarian view on how they show up in every single space and for every single individual in that space. So confronting bias. I think for a lot of us, specifically people of color, this is kind of hard to wrap our head around. Just like the conversation around privilege for some white people, white persons, the conversation around confronting bias or confronting their privilege can be a hard conversation, because a lot of times we like to think that because we are marginalized or because people have not had access to power, they have no bias. But we can all have bias. The definition of bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against the idea of or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Biases can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, a group, or a belief. In science and engineering, a bias is a systematic error. So again, based off of your experiences, your access to education, your if you've traveled the world, the way you look at people and the way you look at cultures, all that can contribute to bias. And I even say in several conversations, when I have conversations with my white coworkers about how, microaggressions and other things show up in the workspace, because that's been a large conversation at the center here now. How are Black people operating in the LGBTQ space, even though that they feel marginalized in that space? How are they operating in the Black Lives Matter space as queer identified individuals, even though they know they're being marginalized in that space? And even though that we lead some of these marches and protests around Black Lives Matter, that is because bias can exist anywhere. If you say you as a human being do not have bias, you have started in the wrong place. You have started in the wrong place when you come to a conversation about race. You have started in the wrong place when you come to conversations about sexism and any of those things that we want to talk about to deconstruct how systems marginalize people in our society. Another thing we need to be aware of is cognitive bias. It is a systematic pattern of deviation from rationality, which occurs due to the way our cognitive systems work. Accordingly, cognitive biases cause us to be irrational in a way we search for, evaluate, interpret, judge, use, and remember information, as well as in a way we make a decision. This is a bias that's developed over how you are taught to process information around certain people, certain things, and certain lifestyles. Again, you may never have contact with a Black individual, you may never have contact with a trans individual, but because you are set and programmed in a certain way, because of, again, the community you come from, or the way your religion views certain lifestyles or orientations, you can already have a determined bias of somebody that is just innately in you. And again, I have to say this, and I have to confront myself on this. For example, when it came to me as a Black cisgender man, understanding the issues within the trans community. For a long time, I operated in a very biased place when it came to my trans brothers and sisters. I will say that because growing up and coming up in the community, in the Black gay community, our understanding of trans and our acceptance of trans was that you were going to present almost a ideal of femininity that could not be attained by cisgender women. And when I say that, I say we expected it almost to be doll-like and Barbie-like, large breasts, full hips, always in makeup, long, luxurious hair. Like we had the expectation of trans individuals in our community. And when you did not show up in this quote unquote Barbie persona, we would definitely have an adverse reaction to that. We would definitely repeat some of the things that my mother used to say to me. You Black, you gay, and now you want to be doing all this other stuff, fighting for the community around HIV. You don't even have HIV. The same thing I used to say to some of my trans sisters. You're already coming out and you're saying you want to be a woman, and then you don't want to look all the way like a woman. You don't want to get breast implants. You don't want to get your body done. You don't want to get all these things done. Again, bias can occur in any group, and it's really the way we have mechanized ourselves to survive. Because when you are marginalized, you want to detract from anything that will highlight discrimination and prejudice towards you. So if I co-opt some of the biases that I know the power structure tends to say, yes, you can be biased towards that person because of this, and that, I will be then more accepted into that space. And that's in any group. And again, when we look at Black folks, again, Black folks can be prejudiced. Black folks can be biased when it comes to a lot of these things. If you do not show up in the Blackness that is well observed by that community space. Again, an example that I can use for how bias shows up in Black communities. My family's from Central America, very Black presenting individuals. My grandmother is very dark skinned. My father was very fair skinned, almost Latin when you look at him. When they first immigrated into this country, because my family had strange accents and they spoke in broken English, Black people in their community like, what are you? Who are you? Where are you from? Girls used to chase my mother home from school and beat her up just because she was different and because she sat outside what they normalized as Blackness. Even another example I can give you of how bias shows up in marginalized communities. My mother is from Central America. The narrative of American slavery and the concept of Jim Crow and segregation were present in America. She was born in the 60s. But again, in Central America, it was a different construct. It was more based in colorism versus Black and white. So we went to, I think it was a Black college fair, and they had an exhibit on slavery. And she was asking all these questions, and the man in the exhibit was like, well, how is a Black woman, you don't know X, Y, and Z, da, 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 da. And he almost belittled her for not understanding the concept of slavery within the American context. So again, we have to be very aware, and we have to confront our biases and understand how we show up in a very prejudicial space when we enter the conversations around race and identity, and how those things affect us, and how we move forward with these things to meet a middle ground when we're talking about advancing social movements and social justice. So, another buzzword for us is intersectionality, a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities might combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. Yes, I think what people see when they see intersectionality, they always talk about how these things intersect to compile the discrimination, but you can also intersect and also up your privileges. There's a lot of us that can sit on this intersectionality scale, and when all of our identities come together, we become more privileged, and with that privilege, we tend to marginalize people even further and discriminate people even further. And I think this is the conversation we need to necessarily have when we talk about biases, right? I am this, I believe in this, I show up like this, and I can digest this. And the things that I can't digest, let's talk about them in the intersection. You know, and I have this conversation a lot, and I say specifically when I deal with a lot of youth that are coming out for the first time to their families, and their families detract from the space or want to put them out or talk to them. I tell the youth that you have to understand that being Black, being Latinx, often is viewed by our parents that are Black and Latinx as I have to condition you to survive. And in that conditioning for you to survive, I need to make you aware of all the pitfalls. And the fact that all of their lives they have heard these discriminatory, derogatory things, have seen people beat up, tortured, all these, adverse things happening to people in LGBTQ identities. Sometimes that's why they hold such a negative connotation to the identity. Not to say that people cannot be just innately prejudiced and have these made up things in the way they show up because of religion and other things, but a lot of times when I talk to parents in the Black and brown cultures, it's the fear. It's the fear of, again, you're adopting another thing, another identity that is going to cause discrimination to be heaped on you. You are co-opting another thing that's going to cause people to look at you, that's cause people to want to attack you and do all these things for you. So in the conversation, I always try to make it a nuanced conversation of, yes, you have the right to be who you are and show how you are and love yourself in that identity and that orientation. But you also have to understand, for a lot of Black and brown parents, it's a hardship that you're taking on. And until you develop a relationship where you could talk about things and talk about how your life is different and dispel some of those stereotypes they may have about the community, and bring them into the community where they can see, for my parents, it was gay people aren't productive, all gay people were going to get HIV. So until I was able to show my mother that, all LGBT people weren't out just taking drugs and partying and doing all these negative things, there was until we could have the conversation where she could accept me, when we could move forward past what she thought, and that she saw examples that she could be comfortable in. She saw people that could mentor me and bring me up in a fashion that she saw most accommodating to the things that she tried to instill into me. And I think that's where we need to also think cultural competency and intersectionality need to work the same way. We're always growing in these spaces, and we're always going to redefine how these spaces look for us, because language will be catching up. Not too long ago, there was no language around pronouns. There was no language around non-binary and gender non-conforming. And when those languages and those terms and those phrases were adopted by our society, we moved to make spaces more inclusive, to understand how those people showed up how those individuals showed up in our spaces. So again, this is a framework that has to continually grow to have the conversation around anything that intersect, specifically when it comes to LGBTQ identities and Black Lives Matter. There is no way we can consistently say we want to seek justice for Black people, Black persons, and anyone in the Black diaspora, and then say, we're going to cut you out. We're going to cut this one piece out. Because again, LGBTQ identified individuals have led a lot of these movements. A lot of our Black trans sisters have died leading these movements, have died in support of causes that have then turned around and told them that they do not belong in these spaces. So these are things that we have to essentially, again, intake, learn and understand the framework of them, but constantly look at them as growing and living things that we are constantly working on and consistently providing more information in those spaces so we can get to a better understanding of how we move forward with all identities, persons, and orientations in the movement being successfully taken to an equitable place. So that's pretty much the conversations that we have, the conversations that we have with youth, the conversations that we have with parents, and even the conversations that we have in a lot of our community advisory boards. Again, this is the newest satellite space to the LA LGBT Center. We are located in South LA in the Lombard Park community at 2313 West MLK Boulevard. This is our general phone number as well as our general email. We do HIV and STI testing. We link to general healthcare services and HIV specialty care, housing, mental health, and pretty much any social services that is needed at the community right now. In the month of August, we have 2 events that are essential to the community right now. We have the Frontline Foods event every Friday, where from 11 to 3 o'clock, we hand out over 300 meals to confront food insecurity during this time of COVID and high unemployment that has effectively or adversely affected the Black and Latinx community. So if you have individuals, friends, or families that are interested and need to access food, we provide hot meals every Friday. Every second and fourth Friday, we also provide produce and pantry items with those hot meals. If you have any Black identified or Latinx identified young men of color who need or are seeking education around PrEP and PEP or education around HIV, we have a town hall called Prepping for PrEP that is for young men 18 to 29 to discuss HIV, increase their knowledge around HIV, and also increase their knowledge and understanding of what PrEP and PEP is. Once again, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to present, and hopefully some of the information I presented to you was useful and enlightening.
First of all, thank you for your enlightening, empowering, and educational presentation. We really, really appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And this is the part of the town hall meeting where we first of all allow our presenters who actually are on now, if you would unmute your mic, they're going to come in and glean and make comments regarding your presentation as well as ask questions. Sarah, would you like to start, and then you can introduce the rest of the team?
Sure. Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Craciolo Garcia. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and I appreciate Percival for sharing that information. So I do a lot of the Safe Zone training on our campus, and I really appreciate that you talked about the importance of cultural competency and the importance of confronting bias and the importance of intersectionality. I think a lot of times on our campus, when we talk about things like equity, we assume that all these little boxes exist differently, like separately from each other. So we'll look at things like race, we'll look at gender, we'll look at sexuality, we'll look at citizenship status. But we don't realize that folks can be all of these at the same time. And so when we talk about resources and programs for our students, a lot of these things are separate when in reality, a lot of students might benefit from multiple types of programs. So my question to you, since you were talking about confronting bias, one of the issues that I've been trying to work on through these trainings is the importance of folks, whether they're faculty, staff, administrators, is recognizing that on our campus at LA City College, we actually have the largest number of trans and gender nonconforming students in the district out of all 9 colleges. And so the importance of using proper pronouns for students, acknowledging their names, whether it's, one of the problems we have is some folks not, because of their bias, they don't want to use the student's name, that they are telling the instructor, hey, this is my name, it may not be this on your roster, but please call me this. Can you speak to the folks watching today about the importance of using pronouns and recognizing the students' names?
I can speak to that. when people try to say, well, I'm not going to use their name because that's not their government name, or they don't show up like this or that and the third, I ask people, have you ever seen Roots? That is the equivalent to that scene in Roots where the master is whipping him. He says, your name is Toby. And he says, my name is not Toby. And they go on that whole scene about you are basically ripping this person and raping their identity once again, over and over and over again. You are telling them, excuse me, how they exist, what they're fighting to exist, and how they have worked through the traumas to get to this existence doesn't count. You're erasing all of them. You're using things that, again, bring up shame for them, bring up trauma for them, put them in a place where they no longer can see the work that we always say we want to celebrate. Oh, trans identities are now in the forefront. We now have language for these things. We want to be very academic about it, but then when it comes to the practical practice, we're like, oh no, we're not going to practice it. It's fun to talk about it in theory, but the practice, and I use the statement that my dad always used to tell me, you get good at what you practice. You know what I'm saying? If you practice as faculty, to inform all students in your classroom, it's as easy as every faculty member putting their pronouns on the board during an orientation. Yes, my name is this, or Dr. this, and my pronouns are she, he, she, that, she, her, and hers, excuse me, sorry, or his, him, and just using that and making it commonplace. The thing is, again, we like to be very theoretical and very academic and, discuss these things when we're in class about sexuality and orientation, but we don't like to put them into practical use. The best way to do this is, again, have faculty using pronouns. Even here at the center, we have to have discussions about that because, again, even in the LGBTQ community, there's individuals that will say, oh, well, why do we have to do that? Why does that show up like that? Again, the language was created to move us forward as a society. The language wasn't there before, so as we adopt this new language, how do we make this language practical? How do we affirm people that come into our spaces that don't show up necessarily the way we believe they should show up? It's about that practicalness. It's about having registration forms that say, what are your pronouns? Having registration forms that say, what are your preferred names? And having faculty being held accountable to say, they wrote on that form that was their preferred name. Can you please call them their preferred name? Because again, that is a re-traumatization of an individual that's been traumatized, that's been marginalized, that's been made to feel like nothing over and over again in life. And then you're just tearing that Band-Aid off again and again and again when it comes to that. This is not a question. It does not take away from you to identify somebody and give them the empowerment of that identity when you're talking to these individuals on campus. And that's also being aware of the community which you exist in. LACC is in a community that, right a block up, they may not be attending your college campus, but right a block up, we have the transgender community that pretty much consistently uses sex work to be able to pay their rent and do other things right on Santa Monica Boulevard. So you're telling me that you operate within a community that is consistently part of the trans community, and you don't want to identify services and platforms that will affirm them when they have made it through all these obstacles to get to college, to pay for college, and then now you think I have to sit in a space that I pay for and still be disrespected, still be, felt to feel like less than. It's just about practicality. We've had to have these conversations with the county, the Department of Health, and sexual programs about including non-binary and non-gender conforming identities, including pronouns on forms. We've had to have these conversations with medical providers about the, essence and importance of this. So again, I think it's about making things practical. Practical things and practical solutions is what we always have to come back to. It's very fun, again, to talk about this in an academic sense and, theorize about all these things, but it's as simple as changing a form. It's as simple as having faculty put their pronouns on the board when, those first day of classes come every semester. It's as simple as sending out in these welcome packets when students say, welcome to LACC. Well, that LACC has a campus that and introduce a narrative of the trans community within LAC and normalize that community and make that community feel like they are essentially part of LACC and not something that's just to be dealt with.
Thank you so much. Professor Taylor, did you have a comment or question?
Hi, thank you so much, Mr. Pandy, for your presentation. I too was really impacted by several things that you said, but one in particular was confronting bias, right? And that really resonated with me because as I continue in my own personal journeys, right, of growth and self-awareness, I often have to come back to those spaces where I have to confront my stuff. And as we keep adding more programs and throwing more resources at a lot of the issues that we find prevalent in our institutions, one of the things that we miss is that it doesn't matter how many resources that you put on it. If the people who are in charge of those resources have not confronted their stuff, it doesn't really make a difference, and it doesn't solve the problem. And many years ago, one of the things that helped me was I encountered a quotation by Audre Lorde, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but she said something to the effect of, if I do not define myself for myself, then I will succumb to other people's fantasies of me and be eaten alive. And that really stuck with me because at the time I was living in Seattle and I was being exposed to the trans community there. And I had not confronted my own biases. And so the thought of me sort of morphing people into this thing I wanted to eat and chew and spit out was really detrimental. And so a lot of us are doing that, whether we consciously know it or not. And so my question for you would be, how does a person begin to confront or become aware of their biases?
I would say it takes you to really, I'll use myself for example again. It takes you to really look into a community and assess your experiences in your community and really evaluate your power within that community, right? And specifically for yourself, when you say you were in Seattle, you were first introduced to the trans community, I'm sure for you at that time, again, to assume you're a Black woman who has experienced America as a Black woman, already as a marginalized thing, already as a person, an individual who's had to navigate spaces in respectability, who's had to code switch. And then what I find for a lot of Black women, it's like, now this is the new hot topic. So what's going to happen to us? You know, I find that bias and kind of that contention because it's going to be like so many times we're left out the conversation and now you find funding, programming, all these things to assess this community and where do they come from? Because we've been here for years. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times you have to see how you show up in there because, again, for me as a Black man, I still had my own issues with the transgender community because, again, the presentations of trans individuals that I saw were very sexualized, very feminine personas, very, you know, not to offend anybody on here, but a lot of times when I was a young gay boy out on the blade, you know, with my other LGBT community members, a lot of times if this trans person did not show up in this super ultra feminine persona, we used to say, oh, that girl is a microwave dinner. Like she didn't cook long enough, she didn't do this. And again, that was me expressing my relation to toxic masculinity and also patriarchy, because the only way I felt comfortable with femininity was a femininity that could be digested and absorbed by the patriarchy. The only reason that I operated in a lot of fashions and the way I showed up, like for instance, if you would have known me 10 years ago, I didn't have this beard on my face. I was very feminine, right? And then when I got into professional spaces, people would tell me, you're too gay in your professional space. So a part of me was like, oh, well, let me grow, you know, hair and let me not do this and let me not do that and conform to this. And then I had to say to myself, why is this person trying to have me to conform to this? Because again, based off experience and trauma, those create biases, those create stereotypes. So again, off your own experience and trauma, you're like, as a Black woman, I've had to do all these things. So why is it now that you get to live in your truth? That's where the bias came from. Why is it now you get to live in your truth? Because there's still Black women out here that can't access education, but they have a transgender education initiative now. There's still Black women out here dying because of healthcare, but transgender individuals have access to top and bottom surgery and all these things. It is really kind of how your trauma resurfaces around how you've had to deal with the power structure in the American society when it has come to how you've been marginalized. And that's where we confront our biases. Our biases are when we feel uncomfortable about somebody else getting equitable treatment. That's when you know a bias is present. The fact of the matter is that we know that millions of us are marginalized because of the status quo in this country, but then we all try to act like, we're no longer biased because we're no longer marginalized because we've received a degree or we've moved into a certain neighborhood. Until that moment comes again where you see somebody getting more equitable treatment or the needle of equity moving forward, and then you're like, oh no, I can't believe it. Me as a cisgender woman, I have to now sit backseat to this transgender, and we've been fighting, we've been pressing, we've been supporting movements. That's bias. You know what I'm saying? Anytime you, again, feel like the equitable treatment or the fair share of resources is going to somehow knock you down because some other marginalized community in your space is getting, for the first time, a taste of what it even feels to be humanized, you need to confront that bias. You need to see how that bias shows up for you. And I hope that was a good way to answer your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. So next I'm gonna ask a personal friend of mine. So they don't actually work at LACC or in the district, but a good friend of mine, Jules, has agreed to come be part of our panel today. So Jules, do you have any comments or questions?
Oh, hi everyone. Yes, I'm very grateful for Sarah for actually inviting me to this because I always love to participate in conversations about, marginalization and intersectionality. So thanks, Sarah, for this opportunity. It was definitely very exciting. And Mr. Pandy, what you said, I really related to a lot of the things that you said. So just a quick kind of introduction. My name is Jules Akliao. I'm not an expert on anything really, but as a person of color myself, I do, what's the word? Like, I do identify and relate to a lot of things that we're seeing today, on today's society and the topics that we're talking about. I'm a immigrant, so that's also another type of intersectionality. I'm non-binary by gender identity and also identify as queer or bisexual. And so, like in my life itself, I see all these intersectionality being at play, especially now in this country, in the United States. I was from Malaysia, which is a country that's very racist still, very homophobic and things like that. Coming here has been an interesting experience because I see here that people are trying to make changes, especially nowadays, right? And the thing is, I can admit that I wasn't always not, wasn't always this kind of social justice type person. I was homophobic myself, transphobic. In fact, I didn't even really understand the struggles of the Black community until recently. And I think one of the things that you said that really touched me was the fact that we have to have cultural competence and confront our biases, which is what really changed my life. Because when I started realizing, hey, I'm actually in the LGBTQ community, and the reason why I was homophobic and all those things was because I was so hateful towards who I am, and I didn't want to accept that I may be part of that community. And it takes a lot of work within yourself to kind of really look at that bias that you have. And so I really thought that that was an amazing point. And I really thought that was very impactful. And I was glad that you mentioned it because it really kind of moved a lot of cogs in my head. And one of the things that came up for me was the fact that I think we don't understand a thing unless it impacts us in some way. So I think I wasn't always concerned about LGBTQ rights or any kind of like marginalization there because it didn't impact me at the time. But now, as a person who is non-binary, so that falls under the trans umbrella, and a queer person and an immigrant, all those things now are coming into my mind as something that I should fight for because, I'm in this comfortable position, right? And I'm lucky enough to have a platform to speak and to share my experience. So I think that the interesting thing about this whole topic is the fact that I think people don't really understand another person's struggle unless they've gone through it or they can put themselves in the shoes of the other person. One of the things that I think marginalized folks, at least for me, and I'm speaking on my behalf, is the fact that I think it's time for us to have honesty and openness to speak of the topic and to confront the struggles that everybody is having because of their skin color, their gender identity, their sexuality, etc. Because I feel like one thing about America that I've noticed is that people seem to think that we're trying to place blame. For example, like if you're talking about Black Lives Matter, suddenly a white person goes, "Oh well, I'm not a slave trader," and you're like, "No, but that's not that's not what we're trying to say, right?" We want to have a conversation. We want people to actually like be a part of this movement, be a part of like change. So my question would be then, like, what would be some practical ways that you would encourage people to do in their current communities, like in LACC or in whatever community that they're in order to help move this along rather than just us being stuck in this place of, hey, let's blame the white people for everything, and that's not the case.
Well, thank you for your comments first and foremost, and then to your question. Um, I think it necessarily, and this is cliche, it starts at home. You know, for me, for example, again, I use myself all the time because if you're not doing the work within your own community, within your own family, what's the purpose of you doing the work? One, everyone is not going to be in a street protest marching with a sign and demanding justice. That is not everyone's comfortable place. That is not everyone's way they exhibit social justice and social change. Secondly, using the example of when my mother got divorced, I work in HIV. Primarily, HIV has affected the Black community disproportionately. And in the last decade, Black women, specifically heterosexual Black women between the ages of about 45 and 60, have been becoming the new face of HIV. Why is this? Because for a long time in the community, we want to focus to say HIV is a gay disease, and we landed on that, right? We landed on that because it was the most comfortable assessment for us to package something and sell it to the masses. That it was a gay disease, you didn't have to worry about it, yada, yada, yada. But in my work again, if the whole time I'm facing out and I'm telling the community you need to wear condoms, there's these things in the HIV toolbox, but then I don't ever turn around and tell my mother, who's recently divorced, now entering the dating world, and coming from the perspective of where she was a woman conditioned to not always be vocal about her sexual needs and her the development of her relationship, and that comes from her being conditioned with religion and also the societal norms of what a woman is and how a woman shows up as a mother and a wife. I had to discuss with her the usage of condoms, the ways for her to advocate for herself around her sexual health, the way for her to understand that she could no longer you know, because the first conversation we had, she's like, well, men carry condoms, women don't carry condoms. That was her very statement. You know, she said, why I don't have a penis, why would I carry a condom, or why would I need to even discuss condoms? You know, but that's where it starts. You have to start having the conversations in your circle. You have to start confronting people that don't have the access to the knowledge or even access to these conversations that we're having, right? I have I had to have conversations with my cousins about not introducing me as this is my gay cousin. Stop introducing me like that. You know what I'm saying? And again, it's not so much that they are prejudiced or they don't accept me in their lifestyle, but people will try to fit you in and assess you with what makes them most comfortable. And sometimes what makes them most comfortable is inaccurate. So therefore, if you're not doing the work to correct that picture, and I'm not saying, oh, you're bad, you need to stop that, you need to know your pronouns, you need to know yada, yada, yada. The conversation is, why do you feel like that? And you know, for my cousin, I asked them, I said, why do you feel the need to introduce me as your gay cousin? And they said, well, we don't want anyone to think you trying to push up on them, and we want to clear the space for everybody to know. Again, their reasoning for introducing me like that is because they thought it provided me extra protection within the community to say, at first, you are gay. So then when I would be around heterosexual cisgender men, that they wouldn't feel that I was trying to approach them in a sexual manner, or that my, you know, like anything about me was going to be directed towards them. So again, until you ask those questions about why do you use that language, why do you think that's appropriate, why do you believe that that thing is that thing, you know, we can't just keep on standing on the fact that you should know. You should know, because I feel a lot of people say you should know, you should know. Even in the conversation about racism, I know it's been exhausting. I know it's been long for us as Black folks, but they don't, and no one can know anything that you haven't told them. Think about being in a relationship. You know, a lot of relationships fail because we've been together so long. You should know that I like grape jelly on my toast every Wednesday when I wake up at 8 a.m. No, you should just let me know that you prefer grape jelly on your toast on Wednesdays, and maybe after so many reminders, it will become a functional thing for me, right? We cannot assess and put these things, and again, a lot of these theories and concepts and the way we think at these and the language that has developed around a lot of these concepts are new. When you think about language and how we process things and how, you know, things are no longer considered mental illnesses and how things have been reframed for them to become more accepting into the mainstream, we have to look at how that arises in our own personal spaces. If you have a friend that's misogynistic, racist, and all you say, oh, well, they're just like that, that's funny, you're doing a disservice to the movement. You yourself cannot say you want to be affirmed in these spaces, and then go home and allow your family to call you derogatory names, or allow yourself to be put in spaces where you feel less than. And that's why I say it's different levels and different actions to take to move the social needle forward. And I think for a lot of people, they think on this grand scale, I need to go out to a Black Lives Matter protest. I need to go to this town hall. I need to do this. But have you spoken to your children about race relations in America and how that shows up in the context of being a Black person in academia or in a school or in a work setting or even walking down the street? Why is it that you're talking to your children about race relations, but every time you see 3 Black youths walking down the street, you cross the street? Why is it that you are telling your children Black Lives Matter, but then in the next breath, you're spewing homophobic comments and disrupting the lives of transgender individuals in your community and keeping violence onto people? You can't exist in contrast to yourself. You have to clean your own house. Clean your own house. You know, that's the old saying in the Black church, in the Black community. You know, what's going on in your house? You worry about your house first. You clean up that house over there, and then you're going to worry about everything else over here. So again, I think it goes back to confronting that bias, confronting how we show up, confronting how our families show up. Because if you're an LGBT individual and your family only is accepting towards you, you are part and parcel condoning them being homophobic to other people. You're saying, that's all right, as long as you create a secure place for me, that's fine, you know, but you don't have to consider any of my brothers or sisters in the fight. And again, just like us for Black folks, we say, oh, we love you and we affirm you, the gay person in our family. But when it comes to gay people in the general conversation about Blackness, it's, oh, we Christian and, you know, I tolerate it. Who wants to be tolerated? You know what I'm saying? Who wants to be tolerated? Or when is ever a time where you said somebody told you they were tolerating you, that you felt that that was a safe space for you? You know, so just the simple things like that, having those conversations, unpacking your bias, and then confronting bias in teachable ways, not in punitive ways of saying you're wrong and you're bad and why do you say that? Why do you experience that? What made you believe that, or what made you come to the consensus of that, and unpacking that in language and an understanding that people who are using those things or behaving in those ways can understand and absorb that, you know, because no one likes to be talked down to either.
This has been quite a conversation, and I'm watching the time, and I know I have two more people on who have questions. That's Naima and Cynthia. We've not had an opportunity to get questions from our guests, but we do need to move it along, and I am going to now say thank you to the panelists and to all of you who have attended today, and turn the town hall meeting over to our president, President Gallagher.
Thank you so much, Dr. Day. And I want to say to you, Percival, I have taken so many notes from so many of the words that you've said. I have a much, much better understanding of some things that I have attempted to articulate, but I was not able to articulate it. One of the things that you said that I think is extremely powerful is when you were talking about language. And language is really, really, really important. And then you followed on with talking about names. And I think that a person's name is really, really important. And I think that one of the things that we should work on is, what is our preferred name? And I agree with Professor Craquiolo Garcia, and that's saying that you know, making sure that you articulate your pronouns, and that we listen to each other, and that we pay attention to each other, and we pay attention to what's important, is really critical. And you've given me another tagline, and I appreciate that, because I like to be able to learn from these wonderful guests like you who've been here with us, and that is, you said several times, it is as simple as something. And I believe you're absolutely right. There's nothing that difficult about this at all. It's as simple as changing how you're doing something. It's as simple as saying, I'm not sure what to do. It's as simple as admitting that you don't know. And I look very, very forward to continued conversations. And I'm just going to ask Dr. Day, I mean, if we could, if there are people who would like to stay a little bit longer, I would certainly like to continue the conversation. If it's all right with you, Percival.
Yeah.
This is one of those conversations that we really, really need to have, and we haven't had it really to any great extent at all. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Please stay on. We will continue, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, who will introduce the next panelist. Sarah.
Oh, okay. We thought we were done. So real quick, I know Cynthia has a meeting with the students. So Cynthia is one of our counselors at LACC. So if you have your comment or question ready, that would be awesome.
Hi, Percival, I wanted to first and foremost thank you. I think oftentimes when we are talking about social movements, we fail to acknowledge people of color, and specifically our LGBTQ people of color, who have actually been on the forefront of issues. I think it's especially important for those of us in higher education to acknowledge that this may be not, this may be PC information that we were missing in our own education. And the point of being, able to kind of break that is that when we go into our own classrooms, that we don't repeat that same history that fail to include those individuals that were so pivotal. I think it's really critical that we collect and analyze data for our queer and transgender students of color specifically. I think oftentimes conversations about equity assume that, you know, a male of color, or even as for myself as a Latina woman, you know, my experiences are very different than someone else who may not be cisgendered, who may not actually be straight presenting. And so I think that if we're going to move forward on equity, it's so critical that we do not forget that those voices matter and their experiences matter. And I think oftentimes it's difficult for younger generations. You know, I'm technically a millennial, but even for me, the language has changed, you know, coming out as a person, as queer. And I think sometimes it's challenging for some of our older faculty and staff, and it's because it's hard to embrace change. But I think there's this idea that this is new, that the young kids are making things up. If anything, I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about how gender identities are not new. And I think specifically in our African-American and Latinx communities, there's an even greater pushback because we have these ideas of toxic masculinity that we have believed are part of our culture, when in fact they are not. And to actually ignore the fact that we need to embrace our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, you know, by not supporting that, we are embracing the very colonialism and white supremacy that many people in communities of color are trying to fight. So when they say, that's not part of my community, but I'm for social justice, I'm for Black Lives Matter, you're actually perpetuating the very colonialism that you're trying to fight. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little more to those ideas and how it can be a bit complicated. And I think it goes back to this line of confronting our own stuff. And, you know, of course, it's easy to say, well, it's just straight people, it's just straight white people. But in our own communities, we really have to bring it home. And if you can talk a little bit about how folks can do that, especially those of us who identify as African American or Latinx.
Thank you for your comments and your question. I think we have to learn that for a lot of our communities, we don't know the historical context of our origin stories outside of whiteness. You don't know what it is to understand that for most of us, like you said, we were colonized and we were prescribed to a societal norm that spoke to our white conquerors. You know, and even in Latin America, when you look at the indigenous Latin folks compared to the Spanish that came over and conquered most of the area, they were again bringing codes of conduct and societal mores that they have absorbed from their white counterparts in Europe. You know, and this is why it's so essential for us to teach history outside of the context of whiteness. Because if we understand that religion did not begin when you know, the church came over and tried to convert the natives over, you know, these blasphemous natives over to Christianity or Catholicism. Again, that religion existed before that. If we unpack and let our communities know and understand that their origin story does not begin in slavery. For a lot of Black people, that origin story is slavery, knowing that, again, for those of us that are Black and have access to education and higher education and being able to access and move in knowledge and read books, we know about these places and societies that existed way before the context of, you know, the British monarchy or the Spanish monarchy, because in most history books, it starts with the colonial conquest of all of the world by Eurocentric individuals. For all of us, it doesn't matter if you're Latinx, it doesn't matter if you're Asian, it doesn't matter if you're Black identified. All of our roots, especially our American roots, begins with us saying that, oh, well, the European, we were discards from Europe, we came over here, and then we tried to build a new freedom. And that's why I don't understand when people say, well, that's not American to be Christian. The first people that came from America came to escape religious persecution. You know what I'm saying? So again, I think this conversation starts with trying to unpack the historical context of being Black and being Latinx and how we showed up with diverse religion and how in our indigenous cultures, there were two-spirit people, there were trans-identified people that were slaughtered by the colonialists in order to conform you to this idea of Christianity. And again, the societal trappings of their European counterparts that they said they wanted to escape, but then just reapplied to those people that they named as savages when they entered those spaces. but yet, once again, not knowing our history, you would continually carry this narrative of savages, not knowing that when they landed, indigenous people helped them to understand the seasons, how to grow food. They kept them from starvation. You would say slaves were, these people that were uneducated, didn't know things, but slaves really turned land over where nothing was growing. In the swamps of Louisiana, they reclaimed that land for their masters to grow things like rice and other crops. It was slaves that, understood what they needed to do to prevent malaria for themselves, because it wasn't like the slave master was taking them to be seen by a physician or a doctor. So again, it is introducing the historical context of yourself as the Latinx or the Black community outside of the whiteness, outside of history in the world began when Christopher Columbus crossed the sea, or when these people came on the Nina Pinta and the Santa Maria. That's not when history began. We have cultures that have existed in China, in Africa, in the Latin Americas for thousands of years before what we contextualize as Western history. And even when we think about the Bible and Christianity, we could go back and forth about that, but it's been several edits in order to enforce the doctrines of another people onto certain people. So you definitely, I think it really begins with teaching people where they come from, teaching them the authenticity of their culture and their heritage, to understand how to unpack those things that they think are part of our culture, or we always been Christian, or we've always never liked gay people. No, that is a brutalization of you by your colonizer. That it was something that your colonizer made, in fact, illegal, destroyed and killed. So in order for you to prevent yourself from being destroyed and killed, you have to accept that and move forward with that. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I would speak to when it comes to unpacking those things in our own communities that show up. Looking and learning at your history and learning that you do not just begin as a slave, you just do not begin as a colonized people, that you existed before those things happened, but before those became the societal norms for you and your community.
Thank you so much. Our final panelist is Professor Naima Payne from the Math Department. And I know that she has been vital to organizing a lot of these Black Lives Matter town hall meetings. So she's our final panelist, and I'm not sure if we'll have time or not for the audience to ask questions, but if Professor Payne can make her comment, that'll be awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey, for your presentation today. It was so enlightful. And, one of my notes that I'm taking away is clean up your own house. That's something that I've been spending quite some time. And I'm a Gen Xer. And, you touched based on some biases that you've had, towards the transgender community. And what I see is that, most faculty are, what could identify as baby boomer generation or the silent generation, who, have these very judgmental type of views that are often translated into the classroom. And then it makes our students feel belittled, alienated, that there's a lack of support when they're using these micro and macro aggressions towards our students. So something, and I'm trying to be more of a mindful educator, right? So how would you, what would be the last fruits of wisdom to embark on the callers on today about just treating people with respect?
So, that in itself is a high hurdle for a lot of people to just get into this space of, I'm going to respect you just for being a human being in my space. And I don't have a formulated answer for that, but what I will say, it requires a calling out. I will use the example, we've coordinated this thing called the Black Staff Initiative that came about because of Black Lives Matter, and also because of experiences where the center was seen to be a white-centered organization that did not care about Black people, even though it received funds to help and distribute services in the Black community. And again, we have these beautiful conversations about race relations and growth and, intersectionality and cultural competency. But at the end of the day, I said, Guess what? In this room, as Black individuals, we can name out individuals that have repeatedly showed up in negative and adverse ways. Time and time again, we sit in these groups where we say, in this group is a safe space. We could talk about our woes and how we've been brutalized and how we've been systematically overlooked in our space. But when are we going to call these people out? You know, when are we going to say to these individuals, this is no longer appropriate mode to operate in this current societal moment? Again, if we're going to accept the language, if we're going to say that these spaces are now created on campus, these safe spaces, but then still provide protection to those individuals that seek to destroy those spaces, you're kind of working against yourself. And the calling out needs to be an understanding of those. I can't get you to change innately what your personal opinions are, but I can definitely set up strategic initiatives and policies within the space of your professional realm that will either you will abide by these rules or then you will be removed from this space. Because again, we had to confront the same things when we talked about the integration of schools. And I'm sure for a lot of white educators at that time that were integrating Negro students, Black students, African Americans at different points in society, we have to have these same conversations. Why is Miss Such and Such class is always sending these people to the principal's office? Why is Miss Such and Such always being, you know, disproportionately angry or evil or mean to these people? Let's unpack that. These people, like you said, they're baby boomers. So I'm sure most of them have tenure. Most of them have worked at the university for X amount of years. Most of them move and operate in an academic space where they're well respected. But it's going to take a calling out by their colleagues. Because you as their colleague, you know, and the colleagues that sit around them can't just say, oh, well, you know, I don't want to call them out. It's uncomfortable to talk about race. It's uncomfortable to talk about how we show up and how we can uphold prejudice, how we can uphold misogyny, and how ourselves can be, you know, the facilitators of discrimination for folks. And if you're not doing anything to work against correcting, you know, this discrimination in these foul places, you are then part and parcel part of the problem and the issue. You know, we can't no longer ride in this gray space where it's like, we know these inappropriate things are happening, these discriminatory things are happening, but you know, don't say anything to them. Let's just talk about it in the social advancement group of the enlightened people that we have every Saturday. What is that going to do to move the needle forward? It's not. We have to come out of those groups. We have to come out of this academic space, this privileged space of just being here on this town hall meeting and say, what will we do as a functionary, actionable plan? And I say this again when I talk to a lot of young black folks about, you know, they say, Black Lives Matter, we need to be in the streets. After you come out of the streets, after the protest is said and done, what are the actionable items that you're doing to continue the social work and the social movement forward? And that's really what it's going to have to take. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to hurt people's feelings. It's going to cause a rift. But again, nothing comes, change does not come easy. You know, think about when you're trying to get on a diet, when you're trying to start exercising, when you know, trying to be on time for work, you always late for work. Change does not come easy. And unfortunately, we have to just get out of that fact where you're uncomfortable with asserting the change. A lot of us, even though we know things are wrong and we know things need to be changed and we need to move the needle forward, it's that uncomfortable feeling of you don't want to stick out. You don't want to be, you know, named as assertive. You don't want to be, excuse my language, but even seen as the quote unquote aggressive Black woman. Or for women in general, you don't want to be seen as the bitch. Or for men that stand up for feminists, you don't want to be seen weak and submissive, that you're supporting females' ideas and access to femininity in equal spaces to masculinity. It's a calling out. That's all. We have to stop sitting here and again only in this group with these 80 people are we talking under the guise of, you know, us being socially aware and awoke, and then when we go out into the world it's like, well, I don't want to confront anyone and I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, so I'll just not say anything, but I'll donate to causes, and you're being passive, and social change requires action.
Thank you so much. I think that last part is something that I really take to heart. And I think a lot of folks on campus know who I am because I am very aggressive. So I think what you're saying is 100% spot on. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Because yeah, I think when we talk about allyship and things like that, it's not enough to just say you're an ally, you want to help. You actually got to do something. You got to call people out. So I really appreciate that you made that comment. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Day, and then yeah. So thanks for having me. So Dr. Day, you want to take over?
I just want to personally thank you, Percival, for just sharing. I mean, your passion and purpose really touched me. And I know you very well. I'm very proud of you. I'm so excited that you were here to present to us. And I know we'll do a follow-up very soon. So I'm going to turn it back over to President Gallagher to close the town hall.
Thank you, Dr. Day. And again, thank you so much, Percival. I look forward to seeing you again many, many more times and doing some things together with you. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for staying who stayed. This is such an important topic for us. And I look forward to more work ahead for us and doing the things that are right for all of our students, our staff, and our faculty. And our focus on Black Lives Matter is so that when we improve the conditions for our Black students, faculty, and staff, we will improve the lives for all. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. We've got two more Black Lives Matter sessions to close out our summer. Next week, we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, and then on Monday, the 31st, we will hear from Benjamin Crump, Esquire, who is the George Floyd's family attorney. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, Madam President.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care of yourselves. Yes, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.